Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this month for Side by Side Digital. I'm your host, Rebecca Shively. We've got a great program lined up for you today. This month, we're talking about transition planning. We all know the importance of having a plan in place, but also know that these conversations can be hard and create tension in families. We're joined today by Lisa Quist, Central Regional Vice President for Nationwide's Land is Your Legacy program. Lisa's going to share some of her best tips for successful communication to help make our transition smooth and to help ensure that families still celebrate holidays together after a transition's taken place. Lisa, thanks for being here with us today. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
So welcome. All right. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to our Family Harmony presentation. Typically, when a presenter starts, they give you their bio. I'm going to actually do that as I go through my presentation today. So we're just going to launch right into this. Before I start, there is a disclaimer that I'm required to show. It just says I'm not an attorney or a CPA, and I do not give legal or tax advice. Here is my contact information. If after the presentation you have any additional questions or you want to reach out to me, please feel free to do that. You can always get a hold of me through your loan officer at Farm Credit as well. They all have my contact information. So before I get started, I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page with some definitions and some terms that you're going to hear me use throughout my presentation. When I talk about G1 or Generation 1 in my presentation, what I'm talking about is the current major owner of the assets of the operation. So G1 is maybe their grandma, maybe it's mom and dad, but they're the ones that own the majority of the assets today. They might actually be the generation 4 or 5 or even 6 on your operation. But for my presentation, G1 is current owner of those assets. And then, as you would imagine, G2 or Generation 2 comes behind them. And if there is a G3 or Generation 3 on your farm, they come behind them. So if we have a 3-generation farm, we typically see G1 is grandma and grandpa, G2 is mom and dad, and then G3 is the kids that are maybe just coming back from college or maybe never left college and know that they wanted to get into farming. So just so you know, when I'm talking about it, that is what I'm referring to. So we at Nationwide believe that the time is almost always perfect to be doing a transition plan. There is a lot at stake for the incoming generations, particularly Generation 2 and Generation 3, if this work is not done or not done properly. If you've come back to the farm at any stage in your life and you've put all of your resources into running this family farm, if that then does not successfully transition, you stand to lose quite a bit. You've invested your whole life. You've invested a lot of resources, be that time or money, and you stand to lose quite a bit if that does not transition successfully. So we've got just a short video we're going to watch. I'm going to hit play on that.
Hi everyone, it's Dale Earnhardt Jr. here. Carrying on your family's legacy can have a different meaning for each of us. For me, the Earnhardt name and its legacy has always been about family, racing, and taking care of each other. While it is not always easy to carry on a family's legacy, it can be pretty rewarding. If your family owns a farm or ranch and you plan to take it over one day, it's important to have something called a succession plan. That's why the folks at Nationwide built a team called Land as Your Legacy. At no cost, this team will help you and your family build a plan that helps take away some of the worries and uncertainties of carrying on your family's business. Get the conversation started by visiting laylready.com today.
So whether you're familiar with NASCAR or not, whether you're a big racing fan or you know very little about it, you probably recognize Dale Earnhardt Jr. Most people know that his father was killed in a racing accident just over 20 years ago. But what a lot of people don't know is not only did Dale Jr. take over the racing legacy with his family, the Earnhardts actually own a family farm. So the cornfield he's standing in front of for that video is actually the Earnhardt family farm, which is why he has agreed to be our spokesperson, because he understands how important this topic is. And Dale Sr.'s death is just one more example of how the transition can take place very unexpectedly. We work in a very, very dangerous industry. We all have stories of people who were killed tragically in a farm accident, or there was an illness or something, and the transition took place at a time when the family wasn't expecting it. So we know that having this conversation is an important thing to do. We also know that this is a very personal conversation and it's hard to share. There's a lot of information that needs to be talked about when you're doing a transition plan. Farmers tend to be very, very independent people, and it's hard to share this personal information. We hear from a lot of the people that we work with that the family dynamics is the hardest part of putting a transition plan in place. So that's what we're going to focus on today, is the family dynamics part of it. So here's my bio, chapter 1. I was born in Wisconsin, only lived there for a short time, moved to Minnesota when I was 3 years old. And my family lived on a small hobby farm. We were out in the country. My dad liked to pretend he was a farmer, but we never actually generated income from anything that we did. Every summer, it seemed like we had something different. Maybe we had ducks one summer, and then the next summer we had turkeys, and then we had chickens. And I was in 4-H. I showed rabbits in 4-H. So every year it was just something to keep my dad busy and fill our freezer. It was never actually our occupation. When I was 13 years old, my parents decided it was a really good idea to move this very rural family to a suburb of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So I was 13 years old. We moved. I actually attended a private school in downtown St. Paul. So I drove back and forth to St. Paul every day. I actually took my driver's test on the streets of St. Paul, Minnesota. And I loved it. I threw my country roots off as fast as I possibly could, and I really embraced the city life. I loved that I was part of the big city. So by the time I was a senior in high school, I had made the decision that I was going to study broadcast journalism, move to New York City, live in a huge high-rise with no grass or plants. I do not have a green thumb, and be the next Katie Couric. And then I met this guy the first day on campus. He was the 7th generation to run his family farm, and there was no chance he was going to move to New York City with me. So for this presentation, we were G2 in his family farm, even though, like I said, he was the 7th generation to run that family farm. And everybody told me that he was the child who everybody knew was going to be the farmer from the time he could walk and talk. So my New York City dreams went out the window, and we moved to the family farm after getting married in 1993. And I learned to embrace and really love that life as well. We were the typical Minnesota farm family. My in-laws lived directly across the sidewalk from us, maybe about 30 feet between our houses. We could actually see each other from our kitchen windows. So we just lived right across the sidewalk from my in-laws. I learned how to garden. They would till up my garden every year with the tractors and say, okay, here you go, here's your garden. And I don't have a green thumb, but I figured it out. We homeschooled our kids. Just really embraced the typical Minnesota country lifestyle and learned to really enjoy it. When we moved to the family farm in 1998, we were running 780 acres. And eventually, with our involvement, it grew to be a 1,200-acre corn and soybean operation. Important part of the story that we'll get to later, my husband has 9 brothers and sisters, and 9 brothers and sisters-in-law that we were trying to work with. We were the only ones on the farm. Everybody else had left and was doing something else. And one summer there was a field that needed some tiling work done. And so my father-in-law came to us and said, would you be willing to finance this tiling project? To which my husband responded, sure, absolutely. As soon as there is something in writing that gives us at least first right to buy or first right of refusal to that land that we're going to be investing tens of thousands of dollars into. Well, we all know that communication can be challenging. Little did we know just how challenging that conversation was going to be. So the statistics tell us that over the next 20 years, 70% of U.S. farmland is going to transfer hands to the next generation. It will be the largest single transfer of assets the United States has ever seen. And due to our producer age, the window for establishing this transition is shrinking. We need to be having these conversations today while we're still able to do that. And people tell us all of the time, the people skills are what they need help with. They understand the financial side of it. They know they need to go to the attorney and talk about the legal side of it. But the biggest challenge is relationships. And when you don't excel at communication, you can end up here. These are actual photos taken at our auction in 2012 when we made the decision to walk away from farming. So remember, we started the conversation in 2010. About the tiling and putting that money towards the operation. Unfortunately, the conversation got ugly, and it got ugly pretty fast. So my husband has 9 brothers and sisters. He has 9 brothers and sisters-in-law, none of them attached to farming. There was no death in the family. My father-in-law is still alive. He's still farming. But we looked forward. We were bumping up against our 40s, and when we had the conversation with my father-in-law, he was unwilling to do any sort of a transition plan. His response to us was, I raised your siblings to be good people. Nobody would ever do that to you. Nobody would ever force you to sell the farm out from underneath you and take that away from you. We did not feel like it was a financially responsible decision for us to just keep waiting, stay in farming, hoping that someday it would all work out. We were running 1,200 acres, like I said. And the only planning that my father-in-law did was a simple, what we call in the business, I love you will, which is a simple will that's going to divide all of his assets equally. Well, if you do a little bit of quick math, we're running 1,200 acres. That means we inherit 120, and we have to buy out the additional 1,080. We had very few assets to our name. There's not very many bankers out there. We were both farming full time. That was our only income. There's not very many bankers out there that are going to take on that kind of a risk. Land was selling at that time in our area between $10,000 and $12,000 an acre. So that's an awful lot of zeros. And we just didn't feel like it was a financially responsible decision. So on a cold December day in 2010, we sold out of our operation. And if you look on my screen, that circle, that's 2 of our 4 kids standing there watching everything that they knew get auctioned off that day. And one thing that I find really interesting as a mom is, as we were going through it, as you can imagine, it upended our life. We both thought we were going to be farming for the rest of our life. And all of a sudden on this day, it was all over. And we were so focused on rebuilding, we had to move and rebuilding, getting new jobs, new careers, kind of reestablishing ourselves. Our oldest child was 12 at the time. And we didn't really think about the impact it was having on them. We were just so focused on us. Well, if you fast forward to when my 3rd son was getting ready to go to college, we were sitting in the house. I was in the kitchen. He was in the living room with his girlfriend. It was an open concept house. They knew I could hear. And the girlfriend was getting frustrated because Josh, my son, was having a hard time making a decision about what to do for college and where he wanted to go. And I heard his girlfriend say, well, just make a decision. It's not that hard. Just make a decision. And he said, Lily, I can't. I thought I was going to farm. I don't know what I want to do for the rest of my life. I thought I was going to farm. So if there's anybody on this call that is that generation 1, and this is a hard conversation, don't get me wrong, we know this is a hard conversation to have, but just keep in mind that this doesn't just affect generation 2 or 3, maybe the ones that are currently in the operation. It affects the small children that are there too, thinking that this is what their future is going to be as well. So if there's anything that you take out of my presentation today, it is communicate, 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 because we know these are hard conversations, but nothing is as hard as that day when we drove away from the auction. Everything that we knew in our life up until that point ceased to exist when the auction was over. So it's normal when you're working in a family business to have conflicting objectives. We're all individual people. We all have individual ideas of what what should happen to our operation, but it is crucial to identify those challenges. Making decisions for your operation based on assumptions can be very detrimental to your operation, and honest communication is an important place to start. How well you communicate directly relates to how successful your operation is going to be. The farms that we work with at Nationwide, we've helped over 1,400 families put a transition plan in place. And the ones that are the most successful are the ones that are excellent with their communication skills. Now, don't get me wrong, being an excellent communicator isn't going to solve your problems. It's not going to change bad behavior. It doesn't take away difference of opinion. But what it does help is it helps you to define those issues and validate your assumptions. And it's going to help to minimize misunderstanding. So good communication really is the foundation of a successful transition plan. So why don't we communicate? There's a lot of reasons that people give for not having good communication, but in my opinion, they all boil down to fear. It's the fear of change, the fear of conflict, the fear of disruption, or just not knowing where to start, which is kind of the fear of the unknown. So you need to be able to agree on your purpose. Your farm is your family thing. It's your family farm, but it's also your business that your family depends on. And we need to be thinking about it as a business and as the business that it is. I like to encourage the clients that I visit with, you really need to take off your farmer hat and put on your CEO hat. Because it's really what you are, is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar operation. So what do successful businesses do that we can emulate on our family farms? The first thing that I recommend is building a family mission statement and a mission statement for your operation. So some of these recommendations we're taking from the books of large corporations, because again, that's what you are. You're running a multi-million-dollar business. And they're going to feel awkward. When you implement these things, it's going to feel weird because maybe that's not how you've run your business before. But it will help to start that conversation, build that communication, and give you that roadmap for the decisions that you're making. So we talk about having a mission statement. So a mission statement outlines who does the work, why you do the work, what you do, and who you do it for. So all large companies have a mission statement. Nationwide's is protecting people, businesses, and futures with extraordinary care. That's Nationwide's mission statement. It's splashed all over our businesses, all over our marketing materials. And so what you want to do as a farm is come up with that statement that summarizes what you do as your business, why you do it, and who you do it for. And when you agree on that, then display it somewhere. Some people, maybe you have a farm office that everybody goes into every day. So you're going to display it in a place where it's big enough for everybody to see it, in a place where people are going to see it on a daily basis. Then when you've got your next big decision that comes up, you can use this family mission statement to help guide that decision process, because you can say, here's the decision we need to make. Here's our mission statement. So what decision do we need to make that aligns with that mission statement? It can kind of be your northern star, if you will, for your decisions going forward. To me, this is the most important piece of this whole discussion, is starting and being willing to have family meetings. So a few things, again, this is using your farm and running it like it's a business, which it is, and it's going to feel awkward. The first time that you have that family meeting, it is going to feel awkward. I've asked people when I do live presentations, how many of you have family meetings? And a few people usually raise their hands. And then I ask, how was it? And the answers I get back are awkward, or really uncomfortable, or really stressful. But it's a really important piece, and you need to be willing to get over that stress and awkwardness of it. And there's a few things that I recommend when you're starting to structure your family meetings. I often get asked, how often should we have family meetings? That really depends on your operation. I've heard things all the way from once a week to once a year. And it really depends on what's going to work for your operation. If it's a once a week, it's clearly going to be a pretty short meeting. Maybe it's Monday morning right after breakfast or something like that, and just kind of gets everybody on the same page for the week. If it's once a year, it's going to need to be a much longer meeting. So find what works for your operation. Once a month, twice a month, something like that is probably reasonable. And when you're having these meetings, make sure that you have an agenda. Just like you're going to run a business meeting in the corporate world with an agenda, I recommend having an agenda for your family business meeting as well. Everyone's going to have rules that they do. You need to have the person who's in charge of the meeting, the person who's making sure you're keeping your meeting on track, the person who's taking notes, your secretary. And I really recommend that sometimes you mix those roles up. So for a lot of operations, typically the person who's going to be in charge of the meeting, again, this is stereotypical, and I understand that every operation is different, but typically the person who's going to be in charge of the meeting is going to be dad or grandpa. And typically the person who's going to be the secretary is going to be mom or grandma or sister or a female in the room. Be willing to mix that up and have the person who's in charge of the meeting be your most mild-mannered, maybe soft-spoken person. You'll see that just changing those roles will change how people interact and have conversations in those family meetings. And I also recommend if your family, maybe you meet at the kitchen table for your business meetings. If that's what you do, I actually recommend that you physically change seats. So if you think about my family, I've got 4 kids. My husband sits at the head of the table. I sit to his left. All of my children are grown now. My youngest is 20. But when they are all home, my youngest sits directly to my left, and our second youngest sits directly to my husband's right. And the only reason they sit in those seats is because they were the youngest. And when my youngest was 1, she needed the most help eating, so she sits at my left. And when they're all home, they all still sit in those exact same seats. It's the craziest thing. They're all adults. They have their own homes. They have their own lives. But we get so used to this is what it is and this is how it should be. By making people physically change those seats, just that can make a change in that dynamic in that family meeting as well. The number one rule that needs to be in place when you're doing a family meeting is that it needs to be a safe space. If you're doing your family meetings and you fail at that rule, the safe space rule, it's not going to go well. Everyone in the room needs to know that they can talk about their ideas, they can share their concerns, maybe share their frustrations, and it's going to be safe and it's going to be respectful. And this is going to give you the opportunity in your operation to talk about different ideas and different things that maybe you want to try in your operation. So then the next rule that we're going to put into place is we need to get rid of the family gossip. This one's really, really hard. I know it's really, really hard. If I could go back and redo our farming situation, I believe that getting rid of the family gossip, if we could have been successful with that, would have been the one change we could have made that would have made the biggest difference for us. Remember, my husband has 9 siblings. So my husband would talk to his dad would talk to his wife would then talk to one of the kids, and then the game of telephone started. And you remember that game you played when you were a kid on the playground, and the first person would whisper something, and then it would go around the circle, and you'd whisper, whisper, whisper. And by the time you got to the end, it wasn't even close to what the very first person said. That's how the family gossip can tend to be. And if that's the way people are getting information, is through the game of telephone, through the family, they're not getting an accurate picture and an accurate representation of the conversations that have taken place. It's a really hard thing to do. It requires one person to be strong enough and willing to stand up and say, we're not going to do this. We're going to have these family meetings, and the family meetings is going to be your time to discuss your concerns, and we're not going to talk about it in a gossip kind of way. Again, I understand it's really hard to do, but really important. And then the next thing we need to decide is that we're going to avoid grudges. This particularly tends to be a generation 2 or generation 3 issue. Generation 1, grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, whoever that may be in your operation, still owns the majority of the assets, therefore still gets to make the final decision. And if you're having the family meetings, which we're assuming that you're having the family meetings, they're a safe space. That's your space to talk about your ideas, to make that case to generation 1. But ultimately, when that decision is made, it is their decision to make. And you need to make the decision, generation 2 and 3, that you are going to be gracious about whatever that final decision is. So then we really have to talk about management versus family. So here you are in this family business. Mom and dad, we're going to assume mom and dad in this situation are generation 1. So mom and dad are generation 1, they own the majority of the assets. And it's really hard for generation 1 and I can talk as a mom of adult children. It's really hard for us to look at our adult children sometimes as adult children. It's easier to see generation 2 and 3 as the 14-year-old kid that we just taught how to drive tractor. Life goes so fast, and all of a sudden, that adult kid might be 35 or 40 years old. And in your mind, they're still that 14 or 16-year-old child. So it's important to make sure that the parents are acting like the CEO, not the parent, and kind of separating out those roles. But then alternatively, it's just as important for generation 2 to make sure that you are showing up as the future owner operator of this business, and not just mom and dad's kid, and I kind of show up when I want to and work when I want to, but then I take off when I want to. Generation 2 and 3, you need to put some skin in the game too. And that may be time, that may be resources. It may be different sacrifices that you're making for that operation, but you need to make sure that you're showing up, generation 2 and 3, with the idea and the action of you are the future owner operator of that operation, because that's what you are. And so both sides have a part to play in this, in making sure that, again, we're running this like a business, and we're treating it like a business, not just mom and dad to kids. So why is it so hard for generation 1 to relinquish control? I hear this all the time when I'm doing presentations. I really think it's important for us to focus on understanding that generation 1 has spent their whole life building this operation. If you walk around your operation and you walk around and look at what's there, it's all the evidence of their career up until that point. It's the new shed that they built, or it's the new combine that they bought, or it's the new hog confinement that they put up, or whatever the case may be. And keep in mind, someday when I retire from Nationwide, I'm retiring from a job, from a career that I've loved and that I've really enjoyed, but it's my career. When we're asking generation 1 to step back or retire or transition, you're asking them in a lot of ways to give up their whole identity, or that's how it feels to generation 1, is that they're being asked to give up their whole identity. They have put everything into this operation. They have spent every waking minute, sun up to sundown, sometimes longer, building this operation. And it's their whole identity. So we're not just asking them to move away from a job. A lot of times generation 1 feels like, well, if I'm not farming, what am I doing? And so it's hard to let that go. So generation 2 and 3 needs to be understanding of that is what they're giving up. But then you also have to make sure that as the transition is happening, it's happening at a rate that everybody's comfortable with, at a pace that generation 1 is comfortable letting go of the reins, but also at a pace that generation 2 and 3 can handle taking it on. We don't want to just wake up one day and say, okay, I was told I need to transition to you, so here you go. We need to make sure that we're focusing on the mentorship piece and transitioning knowledge to that incoming generation. We know we need to transfer the assets. We also need to transfer the knowledge to make sure that we are setting this operation up to be successful and giving generation 2 and 3 the knowledge and the tools necessary for them to be successful. And generation 2 and 3, make sure you're taking advantage of the knowledge that generation 1 has. They may not be as adept at technology as you are, or they may not have the most modern ideas that you have, but they have spent their whole life building this operation and they have a lot of knowledge to share with you. So make sure that you're taking advantage of that. And when you have a new idea that you want to bring to the table, make sure that you're doing an analysis and you're presenting it at the family meeting in a respectful way. I'm not saying you need to do a full PowerPoint presentation, but present it in a way that is very professional and lets generation 1 know that you've done your homework and that you understand the pros and you understand the cons and the risks that may exist. And then someday when mistakes are made, because they will be, we all make mistakes at some point, but someday when those mistakes are made, generation 1 can be more comfortable knowing that the decision that was made was a well thought out decision and wasn't impulsive. And then we always have to talk about the window of opportunity. Every operation out there has a window of opportunity for this transition to take place. Every incoming generation has a point where that window of opportunity will close. And please do not hear me. I don't want anyone to walk away from this presentation saying, Lisa said we should sell out of farming, because I don't want that. I am willing to put my story out there to help you be successful. I want your farms to transition successfully from generation to generation. But you have to understand that the kids who are on the farm, the kids who come back to farm, are giving up a lot. If they worked a traditional in-town job, they would have health insurance, they would have a 401k match potentially, they would have all of these benefits, they'd have structured vacation time, most likely. By coming back to the farm, they're giving a lot of that up. And that needs to be an understanding that exists. And the children whose opinions are valued are twice as likely to stay on that operation and work towards transition. And if they're not valued, or if they don't feel like they're listened to, or they don't see that opportunity, they may someday make that decision that it's time to walk away, like my husband and I did. So my father-in-law's window of opportunity ended when we made the decision to have our auction and sell out of farming in 2012. And I don't know what that window looks like for your operation, but every operation has it. And if your generation 1, if your goal is for your kids to ultimately take this operation over, forget about the window of opportunity. Throw the doors wide open. Communicate to your kids, this is what we want to have happen, and this is how we want you to be involved in this transition. Start that communication with them. Let them know what your plans are so that they have the confidence that, yes, we're going to keep farming and we know it's going to work out because mom and dad have a plan. All right, so then just one last thing to think about. This is particularly to the generation 2 or 3 that might be living on the family farm. And I'm going to assume here that you have siblings that are off-farm siblings. Your off-farm siblings also grew up on that farm, and they have a lot of really good memories of living on that farm, and they want to share that with their families. So I really encourage you to think about ways that you can welcome them to the farm, help them feel welcome, help them feel like they can come back and they can be a part, and their families can come back with them and enjoy the farm as well. So I have a couple examples of things that maybe I didn't do quite as well as I could have. So my husband and I got married quite young. And when we moved back onto the family farm in 1998, I was pregnant with our first child. We moved out in March, and our first baby was born in May, so about 2 months away from delivery. We moved into what everybody called Grandma's house. So my husband's parents lived across the sidewalk, and Grandma had passed away in December, and we moved in March. So she had been gone about 3.5 months when we moved into the house. Grandpa had died 5 years prior to that. But Grandma had just passed away. Well, Grandma loved bubblegum pink. And what do you do when you move into a new home, and especially when you're very largely pregnant and just about to deliver? You start nesting, right? So I personally don't love bubblegum pink, but Grandma had bubblegum pink wallpaper, bubblegum pink curtains, bubblegum pink shag carpeting in the dining room, living room, kitchen, hall, bedrooms. She even had bubblegum pink toilet and bathtub. So we moved into this house and I started nesting, and I took down the bubblegum pink curtains and I removed the bubblegum pink wallpaper, and I eventually took out the bubblegum pink carpeting. I never got to the bubblegum pink toilet and bathtub, but well, what I didn't know is Grandpa knew how much Grandma loved bubblegum pink. So for their 40th wedding anniversary, he had said, we're going to remodel the house. And all of the bubblegum pink came from Grandma and Grandpa's, I'm sorry, it was their 50th wedding anniversary, from Grandma and Grandpa's 50th wedding anniversary celebration. So without realizing it, I was ripping out and throwing away Grandpa's 50th wedding anniversary gift to Grandma. And keep in mind, Grandpa's gone and Grandma's only been gone about 3.5 months at the time. So just keep that in mind. I'm not saying you can't remodel your house, but I am saying just be thoughtful of those things as you're doing it. As I matured, grew up, my husband's siblings, like I said, he's got 9 of them. Some of them lived really far away, and they would come back for, sometimes for a month in the summer or 6 weeks or something like that. And so as I got more mature and thought about, they want to feel welcome on the farm, they and their kids were coming to visit Grandma and Grandpa, so my husband's parents, across the sidewalk, but they had kids the same age as my kids. And so we ended up kind of co-hosting them. And I always wanted them to feel like they were welcome. So when I knew somebody was coming home, I would go to Walmart and I would buy the most age-appropriate, season-appropriate toys I could. So in the summer, it was bubbles and water guns and water balloons and kiddie pools and things like that, sidewalk chalk, things that we could do outside in the summer in Minnesota. If they were coming in the winter, it was sleds and snow block makers and hot chocolate and candy canes or whatever, marshmallows, whatever, just so that they knew that, yes, you're coming to the farm and we understand you're coming to see Grandma and Grandpa, but we want you to know that we love you and we're happy that you're here too, and you're welcome in our home just like you're welcome in their home. So it's just something to keep in mind, something I think that doesn't really get talked about or even really thought about that much, is how can you include your off-farm siblings so that they continue to feel welcome? Because sometimes that's all they want, is that piece of the farm, is the ability to be welcome on the operation. So after this presentation is over, there's a couple of handouts that are going to be emailed out to those of you who attended. The first one, you can also reach on this webpage called laylready.com. I try really hard to not have this be a commercial because there are a lot of people out there doing this work and doing it really well. If you do want to work with Nationwide, you can always get a hold of us. But this laylready.com is nice. It's a 16-question questionnaire that tells you, it goes through 16 different questions. All of the answers are yes, no, or don't know. And it just gives you a good look into where your operation is as far as the transition is concerned and what more your operation maybe needs to be thinking about. So that'll be coming out to you in an email. And then we also have our client guide that will also come out to you in an email. That is just kind of an overview of our program. But what I like about that, and the reason I include that, is on page 6, there's 21 kind of bullet points that we like to have the people who work with us prioritize. What are their biggest priorities? And what I like to see is, I like to see Generation 1 take those 21 items, each have a list. Mom has a list, Dad has a list, and they go through and they number those 1 through 10. What's their most important? Of these 21, these are my top 10. And have them do it separately, and then compare their lists to be able to see where they're at. Because until Generation 1 is on the same page and heading in the same direction for that transition, it's really hard to start that conversation. So that's a great conversation starter and a great way to get those things going, get that conversation going. So thank you very much. This is my contact information again, if you want to get a hold of me. Otherwise, you can always reach out to your Farm Credit Loan Officer for any questions that you might have, or for my contact information if you don't have it.
Awesome. Really great information. We're definitely out of time, but I feel like we could keep going for days here. But I want to thank Lisa for joining us today. And we'll be back next month on June 7th, where we'll be talking about building and unifying your business's trusted advisors. So again, definitely relevant to the conversation we had today. So if this was interesting to you, definitely come back and join us on June 7th. So until then, take good care, and we hope to see you all online again soon next month.